Now may I call upon Mr. Kamal Kishore ji, Member, National Disaster Management Authority, New Delhi, to share his suggestions.
Very good morning to all of you. Thank you for inviting me. When we say natural disaster, basically we absolve ourselves of all responsibility. We say that it's nature, Daivik Apada, Prakritik Apada, which is really not what it is. There is ample evidence that there are parts of our own country with the same level of rainfall that occurred 50 years ago, it causes more flooding now. The flooding that happened in Chennai, the rainfall was indeed high, but it's not unprecedented. It happened in sometime in late 40s, early 50s. It didn't cause that kind of flood. The flood happened because we have taken over the lakes. We have built Lakeview apartments without any lake. We have built inside the Buckingham Canal. Look at other parts of the country. Look at Bihar, where the embankments that are there now, the kilometer length of embankments is, it's in hundreds of kilometers. We didn't have those embankments in early 1950s, yet the area prone to flooding now is more than it was back then. We have embankments made. Kosi is a Himalayan river. It comes with a huge sediment load. As a result, the river flows higher, the river bed is higher inside the embankments than the land outside. So if there's a breach in the embankment, the water has no place to go. So it's human interventions on different scales, some visible, some invisible, which actually manifest disasters. It's natural hazards interacting with our social, political, economic, cultural processes that generate risk. The whole notion of disaster risk is intrinsic. It's embedded in the process of development. It's not it's not something out from outside. And all development processes have either the potential to increase risk or reduce risk. They are not risk neutral. So I think let's do away with the term natural disasters. Let's just call them disasters. The naturalness has to go out of natural disasters. We have to acknowledge that we are causing these disasters. So I think that's a point which is very important, and it's been recognized in the international discourse for a long time now. In the United Nations, the decade of 90s was called International Decade for Natural Disaster Reduction. After that, it was followed with ISDR, International Strategy for Disaster Reduction, and note that the word natural was dropped. So we must do that as well. So the fisher workers community, next time you organize this workshop, I would like to come again, but I would like to see that we have dropped the word natural. So that's my first point. The second point I want to make is that if you look at the trends with regards to disaster impacts globally, there are two things which are very striking. One thing which is striking is that almost everywhere in the world, there are some exceptions, but everywhere in the world, we are doing a reasonably good job now of saving lives. In our own country, if you look at Cyclone Philine, Hudud in 2013 and 14 respectively, and compare it with the similar cyclone in 1999 that hit Odisha, we have reduced mortality by something like 95 or 98%. And we are celebrating that. Our forecasts have improved tremendously. And not only our forecasts have improved tremendously, our system end to end, the forecast or any early warning assumes that there is somebody to be warned and that somebody knows what to do with the warning. So on that also we have done pretty well. And you will see that, the system end to end, we have many more cyclone shelters now than we had 10 years ago. We are building more. We have the world's largest cyclone risk mitigation program. But we cannot be complacent. We cannot be just happy by saving lives. because number of people being affected is actually increasing. So while we are celebrating the sort of massive reduction in loss of lives in Orissa, number of people affected is the same as 1999, and it's been 2.5 years almost. They're still recovering. They're still recovering from the impact of filing. So in summary, what I want to say is that we are doing a good job of saving lives, but not yet livelihoods. And I think that's where a lot of our focus needs to be. And that brings me to how you build resilience in your area of work in fisheries. What does it mean? I don't know. There is the notion, President Clinton, he was the special envoy of the Secretary General of the UN after the tsunami. So he coined this term, build back better, and that's much used and abused term, build back better. But what does it mean? What would it mean in your sector? You know, when fisherwomen get affected by disasters and you have to rebuild their livelihoods, what would build back better mean in your context? What is it that resilience means for them? So in summary, what I want to say is that we are doing a good job of saving lives, but not yet livelihoods. And I think that's where a lot of our focus needs to be. And that brings me to how you build resilience in your area of work in fisheries. What does it mean? I don't know. There is the notion, President Clinton, he was the special envoy of the Secretary General of the UN after the tsunami. So he coined this term, build back better, and that's much used and abused term, build back better. But what does it mean? What would it mean in your sector? You know, when fisherwomen get affected by disasters and you have to rebuild their livelihoods, what would build back better mean in your context? What is it that resilience means for them? There was the example cited by previous speakers about the tsunami effect in Tamil Nadu, and I worked there a little bit, so I didn't work on fisheries at all, but what I remember is that for each boat that was lost, one boat was provided, and some of the boats, the 90%, 20-30% of the boats were not even going to the sea because there was not enough fish, or whatever issues with the productivity. So now, after the recovery, you have more boats going for fewer fish. So I mean, while on the sort of superficial level, you can say that everybody has a very nice boat now, but does that really make your sector, that livelihood system, a robust system? How do we go beyond just sort of catching fish to value addition? How do we establish ourselves in global market chains? How do we insulate ourselves from shocks that may affect the supply chains and hence affect livelihood of people involved in the sector? There is this famous example, not from fisheries, but from another area. If you recall, in 2010, there was a volcanic eruption in Iceland, which disrupted flights for a couple of weeks in Western Europe, particularly UK. Do you know who was the worst affected by that? It was not Icelanders. The worst affected was farmers who were growing flowers in Kenya, because they supply flowers during summer months to Western Europe and UK. And 2 weeks of disruption in supply chain means they lose their livelihood for the whole year, the income for the whole year. So how do we sort of look at our sector and see what are the connections, where are the vulnerabilities, and how do we sort of diversify, and how do we sort of build resilience in that? How do we connect the livelihood systems that are associated with fisheries with other livelihood systems? How do we build diversity in it? How do we, take care of uncertainties in the global market, in the local market, in dealing with that. So that whole notion of building back better has to be looked at deeply and not just physically. It's not just about building back a house which is more resistant to the effect of a hazard or a disaster. It's also about building more resilient systems. So that was my third point, looking at it a bit more deeply. What is the notion of building back better? What is the role of ecosystems in it, health of ecosystems, providing livelihood to people? So this is not really, this is a question you have to answer. I'm just posing a question. And my final point is that while there is some data on what is the impact of disasters in terms of people who have lost their lives or people who have been injured, but there isn't enough systematic documentation of what is happening to different sectors of economy, particularly informal sectors of economy. So I think some innovation there, some systematic tracking. There is, of course, everybody is talking about climate change and it is a real threat to a range of livelihood systems, but can we begin to put in place systems so that we can systematically, rigorously count what is it that we are losing? And this will basically not help us establish baselines, but also measure the effectiveness of what we do to build resilience, what we do to reduce risk. I think on that, we really need to build a culture where, we systematically track what is happening in our different livelihood systems. I think these are some stray thoughts. Thank you very much for having me. And please, next time, there are no natural disasters, they're all man-made.